For making the color wheel, what you'll need is the 11 by 14 canvas panel. It's just one of the thin ones, 11 by 14. You'll need a ruler. You'll need an HB pencil. Make sure it's nice and sharp. And you will need that little color wheel that I had you purchase. So this is going to be really helpful throughout the whole assignment, but even for setting up and sketching out our color wheel on our canvas panel today. So I'm going to use the smaller one for the demo because that's of course what you're all using at home. But just to give a visual, this is what we are going to create. So at this size, but we're going to mix our own color. So we're doing that because, as you probably already noticed with the limited palette, there's a lot of variety of color, even in just a few tubes of paint. And of course, now we're going to be going into using all of our paints. So with that in mind and thinking about like the makeup and different brands, they're all going to have slightly different variations of tone and hue. So we want to make sure that you are well acquainted with the way that your paint mixes. So this is going to become a guide for you. So like we did with those value scales, this color wheel isn't something we're going to make and then toss. We're going to use it throughout the semester. So we're going to use the combo of your own custom color wheel that you're making and this kind of universal key to work with, especially since we're online. That's going to help a lot to be able to talk about color and have it be accurate as we move throughout the semester with our paintings. So to start off, we are going to use this to be helpful for tracing, but first we want to find the center of our canvas. So I'm going to ask you to measure down 1 inch from the top of your panel, and then measure 1 inch in from the left and 1 inch in from the right. I'm also going to ask you to measure in 4 inches up from the bottom. Okay. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to find the middle. So we have 1 inch in on either side, and now I'm going to make a mark in the middle of my canvas. So for the width, it's 11 inches across. So the middle is going to be 5.5 inches. So that's going to be right here. Okay. So I made this little tease. I've got the cross side and the vertical side. Now, since I'm already here, I'm going to go ahead and connect from the 1 inch to the 10 inch. So I'm going to create the 9 inch vertical. Now I'm going to go back to that horizontal. And I know that this was the middle of the length, the height of my wheel. So I'm going to line up here, line up on either side till you get the middle in. And then we're gonna do the same thing where we're gonna go starting from 1 inch in, we're gonna put down our pencil, trace over till we get to where we leave that 1 inch border. So for me, that's going from 1 inch to 10 inches because I have less lined up across the full length. You could also start it over here because this is gonna be 9 inches across. Okay, so now I have this plus sign here to work with, and you wanna create your circle. So what would be really great is if you own a 9 inch plate or something like that, then you can use that. For me, my color wheel is actually 9 inches. Like I said, this is gonna be the size that we're working with. So I'm gonna go ahead and line that up. I'm finding the plus sign, the center intersection of it, right in the middle there. And I am going to trace around. So for those of you at home, try to find something that's 9 inches. So it could be like a plate or a bowl upside down. You're gonna trace the top of it. So like I said, this one was 9 inches on its own, so that's really great. We have 4 pie slices, but going back to our little color wheel here, I am going to line this up, finding the center part. So right where the intersection is, where the plus sign meets, I'm gonna make sure I can see that right through the hole in the middle of my color wheel. And I'm going to adjust this. So I'm gonna rotate it until this black line between the yellow orange and the yellow is going straight up, and the bottom line is meeting up with the bottom here. Always making sure I can see the center line between inside the hole there. And now that I have this in place, I'm going to go ahead and trace it. The reason I'm doing this is because not only we're going to be mixing the pure hues, but we're also going to be mixing a tint as well. And we're also going to be mixing the complement. So we're actually going to have 3 layers to our overall pie here. Okay, so just pulling this away so that we can see that we have 2 layers right now. We're going to add the 3rd layer later on. But for now, I'm going to go back, place this in the center, make sure I can see the crosshairs in the middle here. And what's really great, going to make everything easier for us, is that we are actually just going to make a little notch everywhere a new pie piece starts. So I already have this line here, but I don't have one here. So I'm making a little notch here in between the yellow and the yellow green. And I'm going to continue that around until I have the indication for all of the remaining pie slices. Okay, so now I have all of my markations here. That's where you're going to pull out your ruler and you're going to connect it. So line it up with this notch here and the one directly opposite it. You always want to make sure you go right through the center of your intersection, the center of the plus sign. And now I have 12 equal pieces of my pie here. So that is going to reflect and make 12 equal sides of my color wheel. So now I have an inner ring and an outer ring, but we want a 3rd ring. So I want the 3rd ring to be in between these 2. So like I said, we're gonna have a tint, so that's adding white to our hue, and then we're gonna have a shade, which is gonna be adding the complement. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my main plus sign here, the crosshairs, and line this up. And I'm going to measure in, so again, this is 9 inches, and I'm gonna measure in just to about the middle there. So I'm gonna measure in 1 inch. I'm gonna repeat the same thing with the horizontal. So again, lining up till I get my 9 inches, going right through the center there, measuring in 1 inch on either side. Okay. So again, you can find something to trace for this. So this right here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's 7 inches across. So we're making a 7-inch circle. It's gonna be right in between our other 2 circles. If you don't have a 7-inch diameter to trace, so you don't have like a plate or something like that to trace, then you can go ahead and do what I'm doing, which is making a markation 1 inch in from the outer part of my circle, my color wheel, on every line. So I'm doing this so that way I get as much guidance as I can provide myself, because I am going to draw my circle. Okay, so now I have an indication of every single one here. So I am going to freehand draw this, but again, if you want to trace it, that's great too. So I'm just holding my pencil kind of loosely from the outside, and I'm going to try to mimic these arcs here. So I know that my arc is going to be a little bit less arced than the one below it, but I'm just going to lightly indicate, follow that same arc around. So now I have the 3 rings and I have the 12 slices of pie here. So something to think about is that we are going to be making those shadows, tints, and hues like I talked about, but we are going to start with the hues. So the hues are going to be in the center here. Then this middle ring, this is where we are going to have the tint. So we're going to add white to the hue. And then this outer ring, we're going to put in the shade. So each pie slice is going to have a different color associated with it, but we're going to make it lighter and then darker as we move out. And the shade, like I said, we're going to actually neutralize it and use a complement in there. So we have a lot of pie slices to work with, and just to make sure we don't mistake anything for something else, I'm going to go ahead and label this. So go ahead and label yours. The only thing I'm going to ask is that you do it in the order from which your color wheel is in, because that's going to be helpful when we start using this as a guide later to all be talking about the same thing. So that means that if we're thinking about this as a clock, we have 12 o'clock up top, 3, 6, 9, and then of course the different hours in between. So I want you to put yellow in the 12 to 1 pie slice. So this is 12, this would be 1. So I'm gonna label yellow here. And then yellow green right below that. So continue around until you end up with yellow orange at the end. So now I have mine labeled with the color coordination for what is going to be inside each of these pie slices. So as an option for you all, but not required, is to go over this with a thin Sharpie, so thin pointed Sharpie, or with a pen. So like I have a Micron pen here. It's a 0.08. I didn't have this in material kit though, so I'm making this optional for you. But I think it's gonna be helpful for the video if I go over this, that way it's easier to see. So now you can hopefully see this a little better. I'm gonna wait for this to dry a little bit before I go in to make that inner ring because my ink is still drying, so I wanna make sure I don't smudge it. So also make sure if you're opting to use pen or Sharpie to make sure that you aren't smudging it when you move your ruler to trace out the other lines because you are going to be going over it. So if it's still wet, it might smear it. And then I'm also going to go ahead once it dries and I'm going to label this too. But in essence, this is the completion of mapping out your color wheel. So in order to be ready to paint and in order to have the composition laid out, you want to make sure you have your color wheel with 12 equal slices, and each of those slices should have 3 rings. So we have the inner ring, which we're going to use for the hue, the middle ring, which we're going to use for the tint, and the outer ring for the shade. And then I went ahead and labeled it. So starting with yellow between the 12 and the 1 o'clock. And then following the same label sequence that your color wheel already has on it as you're going around.